The church was silent. Not the respectful silence of 200 gathered guests waiting for a bride to speak her vows. This was the silence of shock. The kind of silence that settles over a room when something has gone terribly wrong and no one yet understands exactly what. Lady Catherine Ashworth stood at the altar in her ivory silk gown, her veil still perfectly arranged, her hands steady at her sides. Before her stood the Duke of Montfort, Alexander Blackwood, the most powerful nobleman in northern England. His dark eyes fixed on her with an expression that had shifted in the span of a single heartbeat from cold duty to utter disbelief. The bishop held the prayer book, his mouth slightly open, the words of the marriage ceremony dying on his tongue. He had asked the question. He had looked to Catherine, expecting the traditional response. But Catherine had not spoken. Instead, she had turned her head slowly, deliberately, and looked out at the sea of faces filling the ancient stone church. She saw her mother, pale with confusion. She saw the Duke's widowed sister, Lady Margaret, gripping her gloves so tightly the fabric strained. She saw lords and ladies who had traveled from London, from York, from as far as the Scottish border to witness the union of the Ashworth name with the mighty Montfort dukedom. And then Catherine spoke, her voice clear and calm, carrying to every corner of the church. "I cannot marry you, your grace." The words hung in the air like frost on a winter morning. Alexander Blackwood did not move. His face, carved from years of discipline and emotional restraint, betrayed nothing. But his eyes, those dark, penetrating eyes, burned with something Catherine had never seen before. Not anger, something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. "I beg your pardon?" His voice was low, controlled, but dangerous. Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "I cannot marry you. I will not speak the vows. I am sorry for the humiliation this brings, but I will not compound it with a lie." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Someone gasped. A woman's fan clattered to the stone floor. The Duke took one step closer to her, close enough that only she could hear his next words. "You would do this now? Here? Before God and every person of consequence in England?" "I would rather do it now than live a lifetime of deception," Catherine whispered back. Something flickered in his expression. For just a moment, the mask cracked, and then it hardened again, stronger than before. "Then go," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you will not have me, Lady Catherine, then leave this church and do not look back. I will not chase a woman who does not want to be caught." Catherine held his gaze for one long, aching moment. Then she turned, gathered the heavy silk of her gown in her hands, and walked down the aisle. The guests stared. Her mother rose from her seat, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. Someone reached out as if to stop her, but Catherine did not slow. She walked past the earls and countesses, past the flowers and the candlelight, past the life that had been carefully constructed for her since the day she was born. She walked out of the church, into the pale October sunlight, and did not look back. Behind her, the heavy wooden doors swung shut with a sound like thunder. That was the day that changed everything. But to understand why Lady Catherine Ashworth walked away from a duke at the altar, you must understand what happened 3 days earlier, when she discovered the letter that revealed who Alexander Blackwood truly was, and what he had done to her family. 3 days before the wedding, Catherine Ashworth was not supposed to be the bride of a duke. Her family, the Ashworths of Thornfield Hall, had once been among the wealthiest in Yorkshire. Her grandfather, the 3rd Earl of Thornfield, had commanded thousands of acres, a grand estate, and a fortune that had seemed unassailable. But her father, the 4th Earl, had made disastrous investments. He had trusted the wrong men. He had borrowed heavily, believing that the next venture, the next scheme, the next gamble would restore everything. It never did. By the time Catherine was 18, Thornfield Hall was a shadow of its former self. The east wing had been closed off to save on heating. Half the servants had been dismissed. The gardens, once the pride of the county, had grown wild and untamed, the fountains dry, the hedgerows shapeless. And then her father had died. The heart seizure had taken him in his sleep, leaving Catherine, her mother, and her younger sister with nothing but debts and a crumbling estate. The creditors had circled like vultures. The title passed to a distant cousin in Scotland who wanted nothing to do with the property. Within months, the Ashworths faced the very real prospect of poverty. And then the Duke of Montfort had made his offer. Alexander Blackwood was 34 years old, a widower of 5 years, with no children and no heir. His first wife, Lady Eleanor, had died of fever 2 years into their marriage, and the Duke had shown no interest in remarrying. He was known throughout England as a cold, calculating man who preferred his library to ballrooms and his ledgers to conversation. He rarely came to London for the season. He attended no parties. He entertained no guests. But he was enormously wealthy. His estates stretched across 3 counties. His investments in shipping and textiles had doubled his already substantial inheritance. He was, by any measure, one of the most eligible men in the kingdom. And for reasons that no one could understand, he had chosen Catherine. The proposal had come not in the form of a romantic declaration but through his solicitor, a thin, precise man named Mr. Bartholomew Finch, who had arrived at Thornfield Hall on a grey March morning with a leather portfolio and an expression of professional detachment. "The Duke of Montfort," Mr. Finch had said, seated in the dusty drawing-room, "proposes a marriage of mutual benefit. He requires a wife of good breeding and sound character. Lady Catherine meets his requirements. In exchange, His Grace will settle all outstanding debts against the Thornfield estate, provide a generous annual allowance to the Dowager Countess, and ensure the future security of Lady Catherine's younger sister." Catherine's mother, Lady Thornfield, had wept with relief. Her sister, Emily, had clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with hope, and Catherine had sat very still, understanding that she had been purchased like a painting at auction. She had agreed because there was no other choice, because her mother would be on the streets without the Duke's money, because Emily deserved a future, because the Ashworth name, such as it was, deserved to survive. She had told herself that it would be enough, that she could learn to care for the Duke, that duty and respect could grow into something warmer. Alexander Blackwood was not unkind, she reasoned. He was not cruel. He was simply distant, a man who had locked his heart away after his first wife's death and thrown away the key. In the months leading up to the wedding, she had seen him only a handful of times. Each meeting had been formal, polite, and brief. He asked about her health. He inquired after her family. He discussed the wedding arrangements with the detachment of a man planning a business transaction. And yet there were moments, a glance that lingered a second too long, a rare, fleeting smile that transformed his severe features into something almost beautiful. The way he had caught her arm when she stumbled on the steps of his London house, his grip firm and steady, his eyes meeting hers with something that looked almost like concern. Catherine had begun to hope. Perhaps there was warmth beneath the ice. Perhaps, in time, they might find some measure of happiness together. And then, 3 days before the wedding, she found the letter. She had gone to Montfort House to finalize the seating arrangements for the wedding breakfast. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Collins, had shown her to the Duke's study to wait while the final details were prepared. The study was a vast room lined with books from floor to ceiling, the air thick with the scent of leather bindings and old paper. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with correspondence, ledgers, and documents. Catherine had not meant to pry. She had been standing by the window, looking out at the grey London sky, when a gust of wind from the open casement had scattered the papers on the desk. She had hurried to gather them, not wanting to be accused of snooping. And then she saw it. A letter, written in a fine, slanting hand, addressed to the Duke of Montfort. The seal had already been broken. The date at the top was from 6 months earlier. The first line made her blood run cold. My dear Montfort, I have completed the investigation as you requested. The Ashworth family's financial situation is indeed as desperate as we believed. The late Earl's debts are substantial, and the estate is all but insolvent. Lady Catherine and her family have no remaining assets of value. Under these circumstances, I believe your plan will succeed without difficulty. A marriage offer, coupled with the settlement of their debts, will almost certainly be accepted. The lady will have no choice but to agree, and once the marriage is complete, the Thornfield lands will pass to your control as her husband. As for the other matter, the matter of the late Earl's death, I have found no evidence that would cause concern. The physicians all agree that his heart gave out naturally. There is nothing to suggest otherwise. I remain, as always, your obedient servant,
J. Hargrove.
Catherine read the letter 3 times. The words did not change. Your plan will succeed. The lady will have no choice. The Thornfield lands will pass to your control. And then the final devastating lines. She would not become his duchess, his property, his means of acquiring her family's land. She would not bind herself to a man who might have played a role in her father's death. But she would not accuse him publicly. Not yet. She had no proof beyond this one letter, and the letter was not proof of murder. It was proof of calculation, of manipulation, of a cold-blooded scheme to acquire land through marriage. But murder? The letter actually suggested the opposite, that the investigation had found nothing. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And until she could determine the truth, she would not give herself to this man. She would walk away, and she would do it in the most public, most humiliating way possible, because Alexander Blackwood deserved to feel, just once, what it was like to lose something he believed was already his. The Duke Alexander Blackwood, the 6th Duke of Montfort, was not accustomed to being refused. He stood at the altar for a long moment after the church doors closed behind Lady Catherine. His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight enough to crack stone. Around him, the guests shifted and whispered, their shock giving way to scandalized delight. Nothing like this had happened in living memory. A bride walking away from a duke at the altar, it would be the talk of England for years. His sister, Margaret, appeared at his elbow. At 42, Lady Margaret was 11 years his senior, a widow herself, and the only person in the world who dared speak to him without fear. Alexander, she said quietly, we must do something. He did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the doors through which Catherine had disappeared. There is nothing to do, he said. His voice was perfectly flat, perfectly controlled. She made her choice. But the guests, the scandal. I do not care about the scandal. He turned then, and Margaret took an involuntary step back at the expression on his face. She had known him all his life. She had seen him grieve their parents, mourn his wife, shoulder the burdens of the dukedom with iron determination. But she had never seen him look like this. This was not anger. This was devastation. She said she could not live a lifetime of deception. Alexander said, almost to himself. What deception? What did she mean? Margaret had no answer. The bishop, recovering himself, stepped forward with murmured condolences and suggestions. The guests, sensing that the spectacle was over, began to drift toward the exits. The wedding breakfast, the orchestra, the flowers, the mountains of food. All of it would go to waste. Alexander heard none of it. He was thinking of Catherine's face in that final moment. The way she had looked at him, not with hatred, not with anger, but with something that looked almost like grief. And beneath the shock and the humiliation, beneath the cold fury that was already beginning to build, a single question burned in his mind. Why? He did not return to Montfort House immediately. Instead, he went to his study in the London townhouse, dismissed the servants, and sat alone in the darkness. The letter from J. Hargrove was missing. He had noticed its absence 2 days before the wedding but had assumed it had been misplaced among the chaos of preparations. Now, as he sat in the silence, a new and troubling possibility began to form. Catherine had been in his study. Mrs. Collins had told him so. She had been waiting for the seating arrangements when the window had blown open and scattered the papers on his desk. If she had found the letter, if she had read it, Alexander closed his eyes. The letter was damning. He knew that. Any reasonable person reading it would conclude that he had deliberately targeted the Ashworth family, that he had exploited their desperation, that he had coldly calculated his marriage as a means of acquiring their land. And the reference to the late Earl's death, God above, what must she have thought? He had not killed her father. The very idea was monstrous. The investigation Hargrove referenced had been a routine inquiry. Nothing more. When Alexander had first considered offering for Catherine, he had wanted to ensure there were no hidden scandals, no dark secrets that might later embarrass them both. Hargrove had looked into the Earl's death as a matter of thoroughness, not suspicion. But Catherine could not have known that. She had read the letter, and she had drawn the worst possible conclusion. And rather than confront him, rather than demand an explanation, she had walked into that church and humiliated him before the entire world. Alexander opened his eyes. He should be furious. He was furious. But beneath the fury was something else. Something that surprised him. Respect. Catherine Ashworth had believed him capable of monstrous things. And instead of going through with the marriage and accepting her fate, she had stood at the altar and said no. How many women would have done the same? He had underestimated her. He had seen a gentle, dutiful young woman who would make a suitable duchess. He had not seen the steel beneath. Now he could see nothing else. For 3 days after the failed wedding, Alexander remained in seclusion. The scandal raged through London society. Newspapers printed gleeful accounts of the Duke's humiliation. Gossips invented increasingly lurid explanations for Catherine's flight. Some said she had discovered him with another woman. Others claimed she had lost her mind. A particularly creative rumor suggested that she had fallen in love with a footman and eloped. Alexander ignored all of it. On the 4th day, he summoned his man of business, a sharp-eyed young man named William Ashby. "I want you to find Lady Catherine," Alexander said. Ashby blinked. "Your Grace. She left London the day of the wedding. I want to know where she went." "With respect, Your Grace, Lady Catherine has made her position clear. Perhaps it would be better to let the matter rest. In time, the scandal will fade, and you can—" "I am not concerned with the scandal," Alexander interrupted. "I am concerned with Lady Catherine. Find her." Ashby hesitated. "And if she does not wish to be found?" Alexander's expression did not change. "Find her anyway." Took 3 weeks. Lady Catherine had vanished with remarkable thoroughness. She had not returned to Thornfield Hall. She had not contacted her mother or sister. She had left London in a hired carriage, changed to a mail coach at the first posting inn, and then disappeared into the vast English countryside. But Alexander's resources were considerable, and William Ashby was tenacious. Piece by piece he traced her journey. She had traveled north. She had stopped briefly in York, where she had sold a necklace, Her grandmother's pearls, Ashby discovered, one of the few valuable items the family had retained. She had purchased plain clothing, the kind worn by governesses or shopkeepers. And then she had continued north, into the wild border country where England began to blur into Scotland. The trail ended in a small village called Kettlewell, nestled in the Yorkshire Dales. "She is working as a schoolteacher," Ashby reported, standing before Alexander's desk. "The village has a small charity school, funded by the local parish. Lady Catherine, she is using the name Miss Ash, Your Grace, arrived 3 weeks ago and offered her services. The vicar was grateful to have her." Alexander sat very still. "A schoolteacher?" "Yes, Your Grace. The school is a single room attached to the village church. She teaches reading, writing, and arithmetic to the children of farmers and shepherds." "And her living arrangements?" "She rents a room above the baker's shop. It is modest but adequate." Alexander stared at the report on his desk. Catherine Ashworth, daughter of an earl, who had been raised in a manor house with servants and governesses of her own, was now living in a single room above a village bakery, teaching farmers' children their letters. She had given up everything, her family, her position, her future, rather than marry him. "She believes I killed her father," Alexander said quietly. Ashby shifted uncomfortably. "Your Grace, I do not think. That is what she believes. She found Hargrove's letter and concluded that I arranged the Earl's death to acquire the Thornfield lands. And rather than confront me, she ran. Then surely the solution is to explain the truth. To show her that the investigation was routine, that you had no involvement in."
No.
Ashby blinked. "Your Grace, if I go to her now with explanations and justifications, she will not believe me. She will think I am lying to cover my guilt. The letter is too damning, and her fear is too deep. Then what do you intend to do?" Alexander rose from his desk and walked to the window. Outside, London carried on as it always did, indifferent to the private dramas of dukes and ladies. "I intend to give her the truth," he said, "but not my version of it. I intend to give her evidence that cannot be denied." "And how will you do that?" Alexander turned back to face his man of business. "By finding out what really happened to the Earl of Thornfield, and by proving beyond any doubt that I had nothing to do with it." Kettlewell, Yorkshire. The village of Kettlewell was a cluster of grey stone cottages nestled in a green valley, surrounded by the rolling hills and dry stone walls of the Yorkshire Dales. A narrow river ran through the center of the village, crossed by an ancient stone bridge. Sheep dotted the hillsides. The air was clean and cold, and the silence at night was so complete that Catherine could hear her own heartbeat. She had been here for a month now, and she was beginning to believe she might survive. The work was hard but satisfying. The children were eager to learn, their faces bright with curiosity despite their rough clothes and work-roughened hands. The vicar, Mr. Simmons, was a kind man who asked no questions about her past. The baker's wife, Mrs. Dutton, treated her with gruff affection and made sure she had fresh bread every morning. Catherine had told them she was a widow. It was the simplest explanation, the one that raised the fewest questions. Her husband had died, she said, leaving her with nothing, and she had come north looking for honest work. The lie felt sour on her tongue, but the alternative, telling the truth, was impossible. "I am the woman who walked away from a duke at the altar. I am the woman who humiliated the most powerful man in northern England. I am the woman who is hiding because I am afraid of what he might do. No, better to be Miss Ash, the quiet widow who taught children their letters and kept to herself." But she could not stop thinking about him. Alexander Blackwood invaded her thoughts at the strangest moments. When she walked past the village church and saw a tall, dark-haired man in the crowd, Her heart would seize before she realized it was only one of the farmers. When she heard a carriage on the road, she would freeze, certain that he had found her. And at night, alone in her small room with the wind rattling the window, she would remember his face at the altar. The shock, the hurt, the moment when his mask had cracked and she had glimpsed something raw beneath. She had done what she had to do. She believed that, but she could not pretend it did not cost her. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Catherine returned from the school to find an envelope waiting on the small table in her room. Mrs. Dutton must have brought it up. The envelope was made of heavy cream paper, expensive and out of place in this humble village. Her name, her real name, was written on the front in a hand she did not recognize. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Lady Catherine, you do not know me, but I know who you are. I also know what you did. I was at the wedding. I saw you walk away. And I know why. There are things you need to know about the Duke of Montfort. Things he has kept hidden. If you want the truth, come to the Red Lion Inn in Grassington on Thursday next, at noon. Ask for Mr. Smith. Do not tell anyone. Your life may depend on it. Catherine read the letter twice. Her first instinct was fear. Someone had found her. Someone knew where she was. And if they knew, the Duke might know as well. But her second instinct was curiosity. The letter claimed to offer the truth about Alexander Blackwood. The truth she had been seeking. The truth that might explain what had happened to her father. Was it a trap? Possibly. But if someone wanted to harm her, they could have done so already. This letter was an invitation, not a threat. She sat for a long time staring at the words. And then she made her decision. She would go. Grassington was a market town 10 miles from Kettlewell, larger and busier than the quiet village. The Red Lion Inn stood on the main square, a half-timbered building with a creaking sign and a bustling taproom. Catherine arrived just before noon, her heart pounding, her plain wool cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. She had told Mrs. Dutton she was visiting a friend. The lie had come more easily than she expected. The innkeeper directed her to a private parlor at the back of the building. She knocked once, and a voice called for her to enter. The man waiting inside was not what she expected. He was perhaps 50 years old, with iron-gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were those of a gentleman farmer, sturdy wool, well-made but not fashionable. His eyes, pale blue and sharp, studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Lady Catherine," he said, rising from his chair, "thank you for coming. Please sit." "Who are you?" Catherine asked, remaining standing. "And how do you know who I am?" The man smiled slightly. "My name is John Hargrove." The world tilted. She knew that name. It was burned into her memory from the letter she had found in Alexander's study. The man who had investigated her father's death. The man who had written those damning words. "You?" she breathed. "Yes." Hargrove's expression was grave. "I imagine you have questions. I will answer them all. But first you must understand something. I am not your enemy. And despite what you may believe, neither is Alexander Blackwood." Hargrove's story took an hour to tell. He had been a solicitor in York for 30 years, he explained, specializing in estate law and inheritance disputes. The Duke of Montfort had retained him to look into the Ashworth family's affairs before making his marriage offer. "The Duke is a careful man," Hargrove said. "He does not enter into arrangements without understanding all the details. He wanted to know the true state of the Thornfield finances, the extent of the debts, the character of the family. It was due diligence, nothing more." "And my father's death?" Hargrove's expression darkened. "That was my doing, not the Duke's. When I looked into the family, I discovered something troubling. The late Earl's death had been recorded as a heart seizure, but the timing of it, and the circumstances, struck me as suspicious. Suspicious how? Your father died 3 weeks after meeting with a man named Sir Reginald Cross. Catherine frowned. The name was familiar, but only distantly. A baronet, she recalled, with estates in Derbyshire. He had visited Thornfield Hall several times in the months before her father's death, but she had never paid much attention to him. Who is Sir Reginald Cross? A man with powerful friends and a great deal of ambition, Hargrove said. He is also a man who wanted very much to acquire the Thornfield lands. Your father's debts had made the estate vulnerable. Sir Reginald had offered to purchase it outright, but your father refused. He was determined to find another way to preserve something for his family. And then he died. Hargrove agreed. Suddenly, unexpectedly, before he could finalize any arrangements to protect the estate. Catherine felt cold. Are you saying Sir Reginald murdered my father? I am saying it is possible. I found no proof. I told the Duke as much in my letter. The physicians all agreed the death was natural. But the timing troubled me, and it troubled the Duke as well. The Duke knew about this? He knew I had concerns. He instructed me to continue investigating, quietly, without alerting anyone. He did not want to worry you or your family until we knew more. Catherine shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. But the letter, it made it sound as though the Duke was investigating because he was involved, because he had something to hide. The letter was poorly worded, Hargrove admitted. I wrote it hastily, and I did not consider how it might appear to someone who did not know the full context. I apologize for that. But I can assure you, Lady Catherine, the Duke had nothing to do with your father's death. He was trying to protect you. Protect me? Catherine's voice rose. By offering to marry me and take control of my family's lands? By making an arrangement I could not refuse. He offered marriage because he wanted to help, Hargrove said quietly. The Thornfield estate was about to be seized by creditors. Your mother and sister would have been left with nothing. By marrying you, the Duke could legally assume the debts and save the property. Yes, the lands would pass to his control. That is how the law works. But he intended to restore them, to make them profitable again, and to provide for your family. Why? Why would he do that? What did he gain? Hargrove was silent for a moment. Then he said, You will have to ask him that yourself. But I have worked for Alexander Blackwood for 15 years, and I have never known him to act out of greed. Pride, yes. Stubbornness, certainly. But greed? No. Catherine sat very still, her mind racing. If Hargrove was telling the truth, if the Duke had been trying to help, not harm, then everything she had believed was wrong. She had humiliated an innocent man. She had run from a marriage that might have saved her family. And worse, the real threat, Sir Reginald Cross, was still out there, unexposed and unpunished. I need to speak to the Duke, she said finally. Hargrove nodded slowly. He has been looking for you. He does not know I found you first. I hoped, that if I could explain, you might be willing to hear him out. Where is he? Montfort House in London. But he will come if you send word. Catherine took a deep breath. Then send word. Tell him I want to see him. Tell him I was wrong. The Duke of Montfort arrived in Kettlewell 4 days later. Catherine saw his carriage from the window of the schoolroom, a gleaming black vehicle that looked absurdly out of place on the muddy village street. Her heart lurched. The children, sensing her distraction, turned to look as well. Miss Ashe, one of the older girls said. Are you well? You've gone very pale. I'm fine, Catherine managed. Please continue with your reading. I'll return shortly. She stepped outside, her hands clenched in the folds of her plain gray dress. The carriage door opened, and Alexander Blackwood stepped down. He looked exactly as she remembered him. Tall, imposing, his dark hair untouched by gray, his features carved from stone. But there was something different in his expression, something cautious, something almost vulnerable. "Lady Catherine," he said, "Your Grace." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The village street was quiet, the only sound the distant bleating of sheep and the murmur of the river. "I received your message," Alexander said. "Through Hargrove." "Yes. He told me what he explained to you, about your father, about Sir Reginald Cross." "Yes." Alexander took a step closer. "I did not kill your father, Catherine. I would never have harmed him or anyone in your family. The investigation Hargrove conducted was meant to protect you, not to threaten you." "I know." Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know that now, and I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I did, for the humiliation, for the scandal, for everything." Alexander was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Why did you not come to me? Why did you not ask me about the letter?" "Because I was afraid. Because I thought if you were capable of what I suspected, then confronting you would only put me in danger. And I had no one to turn to, no one to trust." "You could have trusted me." "Could I? You were a stranger to me, Your Grace. We had met perhaps half a dozen times. You had never spoken to me of anything beyond the weather and the wedding arrangements. How was I to know what kind of man you truly were?" Alexander flinched just slightly. "You are right. I kept you at a distance. I thought it was easier that way. I thought if I remained formal and controlled, the marriage would proceed smoothly and we could find our footing afterward. I did not consider how it would feel to you. How what would feel? Marrying a man who showed you nothing of himself." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower. "I am not good at this, Catherine. I have not been good at this since Eleanor died. She was the only woman I ever loved, and when I lost her, I closed myself off. I told myself I did not need warmth or affection. I told myself duty was enough. And now I am standing in a village street, facing a woman who walked away from me at the altar, and I am realizing that I have been a fool." He met her eyes. "I want to make this right, not for the scandal or the reputation or the Thornfield lands. For you." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why? Why do you care? You barely know me. I know more than you think. I know that you agreed to marry me to save your family, even though it cost you everything. I know that you walked away when you believed I was a monster, even though leaving meant poverty and uncertainty. I know that you have been teaching farmers' children their letters in a one-room school because you refused to accept a life built on a lie." He paused. "That is not the behavior of an ordinary woman. That is the behavior of a woman worth knowing." Catherine looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "I have ruined everything. The scandal will pass. Scandals always do. What matters is what we do now." "Your Grace." "Alexander." She looked up, startled. "What?" "My name is Alexander. I would prefer you use it." Catherine felt something shift in her chest, something that had been locked away for a very long time. "Alexander," she repeated quietly. He smiled then, a real smile, the kind she had only glimpsed once or twice before, transformed his face entirely. "There," he said. "That is a start." They talked for hours that afternoon, walking along the river path while the autumn sun sank toward the hills. Alexander told her about his first wife, about the grief that had nearly destroyed him, about the years of loneliness that had followed. Catherine told him about her father, about the slow decline of Thornfield Hall, about the fear and helplessness of watching her family's world crumble. And Alexander told her what he had learned about Sir Reginald Cross. "Hargrove has been investigating him for months," he said. "Cross is deeply in debt, far worse than your father ever was. He has been borrowing against his estates for years, using the money to maintain an appearance of wealth while his finances collapsed. Acquiring Thornfield would have given him access to land he could sell or borrow against, a temporary solution to his problems. You think he killed my father to get the estate? I think he may have, but there is more." Alexander's expression grew grim. "When your father died, the estate did not pass to Cross. Passed to a distant cousin, as you know. But Cross did not give up. He has been working to undermine the cousin's claim, to create legal confusion, to position himself as a potential buyer if the estate goes to auction. And our marriage would have stopped him." "Exactly. If I married you and assumed the debts, the estate would be secure. Cross's plans would be ruined. That is why I believe he may be dangerous. A man with nothing to lose is capable of anything." Catherine stopped walking, staring at the river. "All this time I thought you were the threat, and the real danger was someone else entirely. I do not blame you for your suspicions. The letter was unfortunate, and my behavior gave you no reason to trust me." Alexander paused. "But I would like to change that, if you will let me." Catherine turned to face him. "What are you proposing?" "I am proposing that we start over. Not as a duke and a lady with a marriage contract between them. As two people who are still, in many ways, strangers to each other. I would like to court you, Catherine, properly, if you are willing." "Court me? After everything that happened? The past does not matter. Only the future matters." Catherine felt a strange sensation in her chest, something that might have been hope. "And if the future does not lead where you expect, then I will accept whatever you choose." Alexander's voice was steady. "I will not pressure you. I will not make demands. I have learned my lesson about treating marriage as a transaction. If there is to be anything between us, it must be built on trust. And trust takes time." Catherine looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light caught his features, softening the hard lines of his face. He was still guarded, she could see that, still uncertain, but he was trying, and that meant something. "Very well," she said. "You may court me, but I make no promises. I ask for none, and you must agree to my conditions." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Conditions? I will not leave Kettlewell until I have fulfilled my commitment to the school. The children need a teacher, and I gave my word. I will not abandon them." "Agreed. And you must continue investigating Sir Reginald Cross. If he is responsible for my father's death, I want him brought to justice." "Agreed. And you must not try to manage me. I have spent my life being managed by my father, by my mother, by the expectations of society. If you want my trust, you must treat me as an equal." A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. "I would not dream of managing you, Catherine. I suspect it would be a futile endeavor." Despite everything, Catherine found herself smiling back. "You may be right about that." The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful. Alexander did not return to London. Instead, he took rooms at the Red Lion Inn in Grassington, and every few days he would drive out to Kettlewell to visit Catherine. They walked along the river. They sat in the churchyard, talking about books and politics and the places they had seen. He told her about his childhood at Montfort Castle, about his father's coldness and his mother's early death, about the weight of inheriting a dukedom at 22. Catherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that surprised her. The man she was coming to know was not the cold, distant figure she had agreed to marry. He was thoughtful. He was dryly funny. He was surprisingly gentle with the village children, who treated him with the same respectful awe they might give a visiting king. But beneath the growing warmth, there was tension. Sir Reginald Cross was still out there. Hargrove's investigation continued, but the evidence was thin. No one had witnessed anything suspicious about the Earl's death. The physicians who had examined him were old and forgetful. Time was passing, and the trail was growing cold. And then, one evening in late November, everything changed. Catherine was closing the school for the day when a carriage pulled up outside. Not Alexander's familiar black vehicle, but a dusty traveling coach with an unfamiliar crest on the door. A woman stepped out. She was perhaps 35, strikingly beautiful, with golden hair and sharp green eyes. Her clothing was expensive, her posture confident. She looked around the village with an expression of barely concealed disdain before her gaze settled on Catherine. "Lady Catherine Ashworth?" the woman said. "Yes. Who are you?" The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My name is Lady Penelope Cross. Sir Reginald is my brother." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you want?" Lady Penelope took a step closer. "I want to warn you. You are making a mistake aligning yourself with the Duke of Montfort. He is not what he seems." "I know exactly what he seems." "Do you?" Lady Penelope's smile sharpened. "Did he tell you about his first wife? About how she really died?" Catherine's blood went cold. "She died of fever. Is that what he told you? How convenient." "The truth, Lady Catherine, is far more interesting. Eleanor Blackwood did not die of fever. She died because she discovered something about her husband. Something he was willing to kill to keep hidden." "You're lying." "Am I? Ask yourself why the Duke was so eager to marry you. A woman with no fortune, no connections, nothing to offer but a crumbling estate. Ask yourself why he investigated your father's death. Ask yourself why he is here, in this miserable village, courting you with such determination." Lady Penelope's eyes glittered. "He needs the Thornfield lands. He has always needed them, and he will do whatever it takes to get them." Catherine forced herself to remain calm. "If you have evidence of any wrongdoing, present it. Otherwise, leave." "Evidence?" Lady Penelope laughed. "My dear girl, the evidence is all around you. You simply refuse to see it. But I will leave you with this, a token of my goodwill." She reached into her cloak and withdrew a folded paper. "This is a letter Eleanor wrote to her sister 3 days before she died. Her sister, Lady Margaret, has kept it hidden all these years. I came into possession of it through, let us say, creative means." Catherine did not take the paper. "Why should I believe anything you say?" "You shouldn't. Read the letter. Make your own judgment. But if I were you, I would think very carefully before binding myself to a man whose first wife died under mysterious circumstances." Lady Penelope pressed the paper into Catherine's hand. "Good day, Lady Catherine. I hope we do not meet again." She climbed back into her carriage, and the driver urged the horses forward. Within moments, the coach had disappeared around the bend in the road. Catherine stood frozen, the letter clutched in her hand. She did not want to read it. She wanted to tear it up, to throw it away, to pretend this encounter had never happened. But she could not. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already growing. Slowly, her hands trembling, she unfolded the paper. "My dearest sister, I am writing this in haste, and I pray you will receive it before it is too late. I have discovered something terrible about Alexander, something I can scarcely bring myself to write. There are papers in his study, documents that show he has been involved in dealings that are not merely questionable but criminal. Deals with men who would not hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened their interests. I confronted him tonight, and his reaction was not denial but rage. He told me I did not understand. He told me to forget what I had seen. Cannot forget. And I am afraid. If something should happen to me, if I should fall ill or meet with an accident, you must know that it was not natural. Promise me you will protect yourself. Promise me you will not let him do to you what I fear he may do to me. Your loving sister, Eleanor. The world spun around Catherine. She read the letter again and again. The words blurred before her eyes, but their meaning was unmistakable. Eleanor Blackwood had feared her husband. She had believed he was involved in criminal dealings. She had written this letter as insurance, as a warning, as a desperate plea for help. And 3 days later, she was dead. Catherine sank onto the stone step of the school, her legs no longer able to support her. Everything Alexander had told her, everything she had begun to believe, was it all a lie? No, she could not accept that. The letter could be forged. Lady Penelope was Sir Reginald's sister. She had every reason to want to drive a wedge between Catherine and the Duke. This could be a trick, a manipulation, a weapon in whatever game the Cross family was playing. But the doubt was there now. It would not be silenced. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could provide them. She did not wait for Alexander to visit. The next morning, she hired a cart to take her to Grassington. She found him in the private parlor of the Red Lion, reading correspondence, a cup of tea cooling at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted immediately at the sight of her face. "Catherine? What's wrong?" She did not speak. She simply placed the letter on the table before him. Alexander looked at it. His face went very still. "Where did you get this?" "Lady Penelope Cross gave it to me. She came to Kettlewell yesterday to warn me about you." Alexander closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was something in his expression Catherine had never seen before. Grief. Raw, unhealed grief. "This letter," he said quietly. "It is real." Catherine felt her heart stop. "What?" "It is real. Eleanor wrote it 3 days before she died. Margaret gave it to me afterward, when I was half mad with grief. She thought I should know what my wife believed about me. And? Is it true? Were you involved in criminal dealings? Did she have reason to fear you?" Alexander rose from his chair. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "No," he said, "it is not true, but I understand why she believed it." "Explain." He was silent for a long moment. Then he turned back to face her. "Eleanor was not well," he said. "In the months before her death, she had become increasingly paranoid. She imagined threats everywhere. She accused the servants of spying on her. She accused me of terrible things. The physicians said it was a disorder of the mind, brought on by the fever that eventually killed her. But I did not want to believe it. I thought if I could just prove to her that her fears were unfounded, she would recover. But she didn't.
No.
She grew worse. And the documents she mentions in that letter, they were the source of her delusion. They were shipping manifests, Catherine. Ordinary business records. But Eleanor had become convinced they were evidence of some grand criminal conspiracy. She confronted me about them, and His voice broke. I lost my temper.
I shouted at her.
I told her she was being irrational. And 3 days later, she was dead. Catherine stared at him. "You did not kill her."
No.
"God help me, I did not. But I was not kind to her either. I was frustrated and frightened, and I did not know how to help her. And when she died, I blamed myself. I still blame myself." The room was silent. Catherine looked at the letter, still lying on the table. She thought about Eleanor Blackwood, alone and terrified, convinced her husband was a monster. She thought about Alexander, young and overwhelmed, watching his wife spiral into madness. And she thought about Lady Penelope Cross, who had handed her this letter with a smile, knowing exactly what it would do. "Alexander," she said, "I believe you." He looked at her, and the hope in his eyes was almost painful to see. "You do. I believe you. But there is something else we need to discuss." "What?" Catherine took a deep breath. "Lady Penelope knew exactly where to find me. She knew about the letter. She knew about Eleanor." "How did she know all of that?" Alexander's expression hardened. "Because someone told her. Someone close to me." "Who?" "I don't know. But I intend to find out." The investigation that followed was unlike anything Catherine had experienced. Alexander returned to London, taking the letter with him. He confronted his sister, Lady Margaret, who admitted that the letter had been stolen from her private papers several months earlier. She had not reported the theft because she was ashamed. Ashamed of what the letter contained, ashamed of what it revealed about her brother's marriage. "She has been carrying this guilt for years," Alexander told Catherine when he returned to Yorkshire a week later. "She thought if the letter became public, it would destroy me. So she said nothing, hoping it would never surface. And now it has." "Yes, but the question is, who stole it? And who gave it to Lady Penelope Cross?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Hargrove, continuing his investigation into Sir Reginald, discovered that the baronet had a connection to Alexander's household. One of the Duke's footmen, a young man named Thomas Wells, had been dismissed 6 months earlier for drunkenness. What no one had realized was that Wells had found new employment with Sir Reginald Cross. Wells had access to the private quarters, Hargrove explained. He would have known where Lady Margaret kept her papers, and he would have had ample opportunity to take the letter before he was dismissed. But how did Sir Reginald know about the letter in the first place? Catherine asked. Because someone told him. Someone who knew about Eleanor's accusations and wanted to use them as a weapon against the Duke. Alexander's expression was grim. "Someone in my household is feeding information to Cross. Find out who." The net closed quickly after that. Within a week, Hargrove had identified the traitor. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, the same woman who had shown Catherine to the Duke's study on the day she found the original letter. Mrs. Collins had been in the Duke's employ for 20 years, but she had a secret. Her younger brother was deeply in debt to Sir Reginald Cross, and Cross had threatened to ruin him unless Mrs. Collins provided information about the Duke's private affairs. "She told him about my interest in the Thornfield estate," Alexander said. "She told him about Hargrove's investigation. She told him about Eleanor's letter. She told him everything. What will happen to her? She has been dismissed. I should have her prosecuted, but—" He shook his head. "She is an old woman who made a terrible choice to protect her family. I understand that, perhaps too well. But the revelations did not end there." Hargrove's investigation into Sir Reginald Cross had finally uncovered the evidence they needed. A former servant of the Cross household, now living in York, had come forward with a story that changed everything. The servant, a woman named Mary Dean, had been Lady Penelope's personal maid. She had left the household abruptly 2 years earlier and had been living quietly ever since. But when Hargrove tracked her down, she agreed to talk. "Sir Reginald poisoned the Earl," Mary Dean said. "I did not witness it myself, but I heard him discussing it with his sister. They used a substance that mimics heart failure. The physicians would never have detected it." "Why did you not come forward sooner?" Hargrove asked. "Because I was afraid. Sir Reginald is a dangerous man. He has powerful friends. I thought if I spoke out, he would have me killed. But I cannot live with the guilt any longer." The Earl was a good man. He did not deserve what happened to him. Armed with Mary Dean's testimony, Alexander took the case to the authorities. Sir Reginald Cross was arrested at his Derbyshire estate. Lady Penelope, facing charges of conspiracy, fled to the continent before she could be apprehended. The scandal was enormous. The newspapers, which had so gleefully reported on Catherine's flight from the altar, now carried a very different story. The Duke of Montfort was not a villain but a hero. He had uncovered a murder, brought a killer to justice, and cleared the name of the woman who had wronged him. And Catherine, reading the accounts in her small room in Kettlewell, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Winter came to the Dales, and with it snow. The school closed for the Christmas season, and Catherine found herself with more time than she knew what to do with. Alexander continued to visit, braving the icy roads to spend long afternoons in the baker's parlor, drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. Their courtship had become something neither of them had expected. It was not the formal, careful dance of aristocratic romance. It was two people who had been through fire together, learning to trust each other in the quiet aftermath. "I have something to ask you," Alexander said one evening, as they sat before the fire in the Red Lion's private parlor. Catherine looked at him. "What?" "I know we agreed to take things slowly. I know I promised not to pressure you. But the truth is, Catherine, I am not getting any younger. And I have spent enough years alone." Her heart quickened. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you." The words were simple, unadorned, and absolutely sincere. "I did not expect to. When I proposed the first time, I was thinking only of duty and practicality. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between the altar and this village and everything that happened, I fell in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably." Catherine felt tears sting her eyes. "Alexander, you do not have to answer now. You do not have to answer at all. But I wanted you to know, whatever you decide, I will accept it. I will not make the same mistakes I made before." She looked at him. This proud, guarded, difficult man who had lost so much and still found the courage to open his heart again. And she realized that somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with him too. "I love you," she said. "I think I have loved you for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. "Then will you marry me, Catherine Ashworth? Not because you must. Not because of duty or contracts or family obligations. But because you want to?" "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. Because I want to. Because I choose to. Because you are the man I want to spend my life with." He crossed the room and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and steady, and Catherine felt something settle into place inside her. Something that had been missing for a very long time. "No more secrets," he said. "No more distance. No more walls between us." "No more secrets," she agreed. "We face whatever comes together." "Together," he repeated, and kissed her. 1 year later, they were married in the village church at Kettlewell, with only a handful of guests in attendance. It was exactly what Catherine wanted. She wore a simple ivory gown, not the elaborate confection that had been ordered for her first wedding. The children from the school sat in the front pews, scrubbed and shining in their best clothes. Mrs. Dutton cried into her handkerchief. Mr. Hargrove stood as witness. Lady Margaret, who had traveled from London, watched with a complicated expression that was part joy and part sorrow. And Alexander, waiting at the altar, looked at Catherine as though she were the most precious thing in the world. When the bishop asked if she would take this man to be her husband, Catherine did not hesitate. "I will," she said, her voice clear and strong. And this time she meant it with her whole heart. The years that followed were not without challenges. Sir Reginald Cross was convicted of murder and died in prison awaiting execution. Lady Penelope was never found, though rumors placed her in Italy, living under an assumed name. The Thornfield estate, saved from ruin by Alexander's careful management, was eventually passed to Catherine's younger sister Emily and her new husband, a kind and steady young man from a neighboring county. Catherine and Alexander made their home at Montfort Castle, a vast stone fortress in the Northumberland hills. Catherine discovered that she loved the wild northern landscape, the wind-swept moors, the rocky coastline, the ever-changing sky. She established a school in the local village, modeled after the one in Kettlewell, and spent her days teaching and her evenings reading in the castle's enormous library. And Alexander became a different man entirely. The cold, distant Duke who had once terrified London society turned out to be, in private, remarkably warm. He laughed more. He smiled more. He took long walks with Catherine through the castle gardens, holding her hand and talking about everything from philosophy to the proper way to prune roses. They had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and Alexander proved to be the kind of father who got down on the floor to play with toy soldiers and read bedtime stories in funny voices. "Who are you?" Catherine teased him once. "And what have you done with the terrifying Duke of Montfort?" "He's still here," Alexander said, pulling her close. "He just needed someone to remind him that there is more to life than duty." "And did I remind you?" "You reminded me of everything." He kissed her forehead. "Everything that matters." On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Catherine and Alexander returned to Kettlewell. The village had not changed much. The stone cottages still clustered around the river. The sheep still dotted the hillsides. The school still stood beside the church, and the children still came every morning to learn their letters. Catherine walked through the village, her hand in Alexander's, and felt a profound sense of peace. "This is where I found myself," she said. "When I ran from you, I thought I was running toward nothing. But I found a life here. I found purpose. I found strength I didn't know I had." "And then I found you," Alexander said. "Yes, and then you found me." They stood together on the stone bridge, watching the river flow beneath them. The water was the same as it had always been, constant, unchanging, carrying everything away. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "The scandal, the humiliation, everything that happened." Alexander was silent for a moment. Then he said, "No, I regret the pain, certainly. I regret that you had to suffer through so much uncertainty and fear. But I do not regret how it ended. Because if you had not walked away from that altar, we might have spent our lives as strangers, bound together by duty rather than love. And that would have been the greater tragedy." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you, Alexander Blackwood. I love you too, Catherine, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." The river flowed on. The sheep grazed on the hillsides. The village carried on with its quiet, ordinary life. And the Duke and Duchess of Montfort stood together on the bridge, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, and watched the sun set over the Yorkshire dales. The story of Lady Catherine Ashworth spread far beyond the borders of Yorkshire. In the drawing rooms of London, it was told as a cautionary tale about the dangers of jumping to conclusions. In the servants' halls, it was a romance, the lady who had the courage to walk away, and the Duke who loved her enough to follow. In the village of Kettlewell, it was simply the story of Miss Ashe, the schoolteacher who had turned out to be a duchess, and who had never forgotten the children she taught. But for Catherine and Alexander, it was not a story at all. It was their life, a life built on mistakes and forgiveness, on secrets uncovered and truths revealed, on 2 people who had every reason to give up on each other but chose instead to fight for something greater. And every year, on the anniversary of that disastrous first wedding, they would return to the little church in Kettlewell. Not to mourn what might have been, but to celebrate what was. Because sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that begin smoothly. Sometimes they are the ones that begin with a woman walking away from everything she was supposed to want, and a man who loved her enough to let her go so that she could choose to come back. Love isn't always about a perfect beginning. Sometimes it's about forgiveness, courage, and finding your way back to each other. If Catherine and Alexander's journey touched your heart, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know, what was the moment in the story that made you believe they would truly find their way back to one another? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more timeless historical romances that stay with you long after the final chapter.